them, I don't know what
Why does it appeal? I mean, it's almost like a paradox, isn't it? We don't really like violence being done to us, and yet it's hard to deny that it's thrilling.
You've got to hear me!
I think, first of all, you have to acknowledge we're a violent species, you know? And the male of the species is the most prone to violence. So it's an expression of that. It's a modern technological age expression of the violent propensities in human nature.
Subjected to lots and lots of violence, they do tend to see violence as a more normalised part of social function, and they do seem to see it as in a slightly romanticised way, and they don't tend to see or be prepared to take responsibility for the consequences of the violence, the consequences not only on the victim but the consequences of violence on everybody around them.
I still haven't seen any conclusive research that shows that your ordinary, well-adjusted human being has any real difficulty knowing when a game is a game and when life is real.
There is some literature, and most of it supports what I just said, which is that actually, as we have more violence in the media and we romanticise the violence, it tends to be seen as a much more mainstream way of responding to distress or to anger or to frustration.
We counted up how many incidents of violence there were and compared to other studies in the United States and in the UK. What we found is that we were comparable to the US and the UK in the number of violent incidents per hour, and that was 8 to 10 incidents. So it would be considered relatively high.
For some people, the violence that is all around us in the media world probably encourages the darker side of their natures or mirrors the darker side of their natures and is not helpful, you know. And I don't think it probably makes us a better species in that sense, or society safer. I don't know what you do about that, because I think what people, you know, anybody who is influenced directly by fantasy violence has already got problems, probably. You know, you can never just say there's a direct correlation between media violence and someone going out and wanting to hit someone. They'll probably have alcohol and substance abuse issues, they'll probably have a history of violence in the home, domestic abuse, whatever, they'll possibly be less well educated. There'll be all kinds of explanations.
So I've seen a lot of people who have been the perpetrators of serious violence over the years. That's part of my job, to assess them, and part of that assessment requires me to talk to them and try and gain some understanding from their background of how that came to be. And without doubt, almost every one of them describes a history of having been either subject to violence themselves or witnesses to violence or violent events.
Hollywood in many ways has become a propaganda arm of the American way of life, and part of that is violence. So so the movie industry is particularly violent, and it is gratuitous, a lot of that violence, and it's slapstick almost. Now, I think at some deep level that probably is influencing people. That is it's not making people violent, but it's making people less shocked by what is actually, if you saw it in real life, you'd be shocked, you'd throw up. You know, but instead you laugh because you're in the safety of the cinema.
As the project you're working on evolves, you know, something you'd written as, you know, she's riding on a bicycle, gets hit by a car, and playing that out in actuality, there's several ways you can do it. You can make it grueling and tough for everyone, or it can be almost slapstick. So it's all tonal. Violence is, the description of a violent act how you take that act and put those images together and what the outcome of those images is, that's the question you've got to ask, you know.
The big problem I have is the way the news media uses crime, and particularly violent crime, as an easy news source.
It's tough to tell where and when you could be the victim of a violent crime.
3 men have waged a violent drug-fueled crime spree.
It's a scene becoming all too familiar across the country.
An almost incomprehensible picture emerging tonight.
52 people were shot, 8 of them killed, in a wave of violence across the city.
That feeds a false perception of how violent society actually is. If you look at the real statistics, violent crime is usually levelling off or even declining. But it's filling more and more column inches and minutes on the news and in the newspaper. So people get a feeling, a perception that society is very violent and that they're in danger all the time of being mugged or burgled or raped or murdered.
You've just got to be so careful that you don't adopt a position that says violence is bad, because violence is part of our story vocabulary. And to remove it entirely would neuter the material or the ability of storytellers to be truthful.
Actually, if we're honest with ourselves, we get a kind of thrill out of it, we get a kick out of it. The real question is it safer or more healthy for people to get that kick vicariously through media or video games or movies or whatever, as opposed to, in reality, being violent? Maybe violence in the media is a kind of safety valve. That's one way of looking at it, rather than a terrible thing that needs to be stamped out.